Hello everybody and welcome to Drawing Pets in Charcoal. My name is Erin Holt and I am going to lead you through this project today. First thing I want to do is talk about the paper. You've got two kinds. The first one is this fancy paper. It's a Hahnemühle Ingres paper, spelled I-N-G-R-E-S. If you like it, you can buy more of it. It's a great charcoal paper. The other three papers are going to be a lightweight sketch drawing paper. That's actually what I'm going to demo on today. I would suggest doing some sketches first so you can get used to the medium and then moving on to the fancy paper. Or if you want to, you can dive straight into the fancy paper. It's yours. You get to choose. Now, I'm going to draw this rabbit today, and they are not actually my rabbit. I believe if you Google Rex rabbit, this is like one of the first one that comes up. I just think they're really cute. And so the first step in sketching this is I've got a printout, and I'm drawing on top of that printout so I can get a good sense of what my basic shapes are. You'll hear me talk about that a lot, basic shapes. You can use this technique to draw almost anything. You take an image that you're looking at, and instead of looking at the whole image and all the detail, which can be really overwhelming, I want to look at what are the simplest, most basic shapes. Now, obviously, I see triangles, but there are a lot of curves in this, and don't worry, we will correct for that. I can see all those curves. We are going to address those. I just want to start with my basic shapes, and when I see this rabbit, I see a lot of triangles. So I've got the rabbit off to the right, and I've got my sketch paper off to the left, and I'm going to start just adding in the triangles, just the triangles, nothing else, not worrying about anything else, just thinking about where those triangles are going to go. And I'm going to start with the triangle that's going to be the ear. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is show you how light I would recommend drawing. Go very light with your pencil. I don't like to erase very much. It changes the texture of your paper and it just slows you down. So you want to go very light when you're using your pencil sketch. Now I'm going to start drawing darker so you guys can actually see what I'm doing. So I've got that first triangle in. That's going to be the ear. And now I want to get pretty close with proportions on putting that second triangle down. So things that I'm looking at are how long is the length of this triangle versus the length of the other triangle. And you can see they're about the same length. I've been doing this a while, so I'm pretty good at eyeballing it. But you can use a ruler if you want and just check out, okay, if this is a 3-inch triangle, then I need to do a 4-inch length on this triangle. You also can look at the angle. Is it a 90-degree angle? Is it a 360-degree angle? How do those triangles connect? If this sounds kind of tedious, I promise it gets a lot easier and faster the more you do it. And it can be approximate, does not need to be perfect. But I'm looking at how these two triangles interact with each other and laying them down next to each other in proportion, so in the correct sort of arrangement and size comparison to each other on the page. Now, I'm not going to do the whole body of the rabbit, just for simplicity's sake. I want to keep this tutorial pretty straightforward, but I am going to add in these little lines to indicate where the rest of the rabbit body would go. So this, I guess, would be a bust of a rabbit if I were to use human portrait terminology. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the rest of my materials. I've got first off, my white charcoal. I'll explain what that is in a minute, and a couple pieces of charcoal. The white charcoal is not actually charcoal, obviously. It is actually a white Conte crayon, technically, or a hard pastel. You can use a white chalk or other kinds of pastels if you ever want to do more charcoal drawing. This is a pretty standard one. It's made by General. It's a very good, high-quality white layer. We won't use that until the end. Now we're going to be using our charcoal now to start adding in our layers. And what you saw me just doing there with my hand was I was indicating the areas I was going to focus on first. One of those is those correcting curves. I mentioned that obviously it's not triangles, it's got a lot of curves to it. I want to get those curves in right away so I really fully understand the shape of my animal. Now, fortunately, it's a little bit easier to look at those curves and interpret those curves because instead of having to see all of them all at once, I'm just looking at them in comparison to each of my triangles. How much do I need to round out my triangles to make it match the picture? So I'm going to swoop down under here for the neck. I'm going to add a nice soft swoop for the chest. I'm going to even add in some darker sections as I go, maybe some darker lines to indicate where it's a little bit more intense shadow-wise. But yeah, got some pretty good outlines there, so now I can start filling in. So details are where things can start to get scary. So we're going to do what is probably the hardest detail in most animals, and that's the eye. A big part of eye is placement. It's easy to get it too high, too low, too far right, too far left. And it's also easy to get it too big or too small. So here's a few tricks you can use to try and combat all that. The first thing I did there is I just made 4 little hash lines, and I'm counting out how many hash lines away from the edge the eye is on the drawing. So I'm using these little tick marks to approximate how many lines down does it go. And let's see, if I do 4 equal lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, the eye takes up this length of that second mark. So it's 1/4 of the length of the head, and it's that second quarter in from the left. So that gives me a pretty good approximation of shape. And then as far as size go, it's about equidistant from the edge of that one triangle to the top of the head. So I have about equal space between the top of the head and the left side of the triangle, and that's how I got the shape that I needed. Now I'm adding a little bit of darkness, and that darkness is following the shapes I'm seeing in the eye, but very importantly, I'm keeping that highlight spot nice and bright. We can add some white later, but even if I add white, it's not going to be as bright if I leave the paper all on its own. Now you're going to see me add some other layers in now, and I'm doing some nice soft curved shapes, and that's to follow the shape of the animal. It has very curved, soft structure. So I'm swooping my charcoal, moving it in a curved fashion as I lay down my lines. While I'm going to blend this all out, it still pays to try and follow whatever shape or texture you see on the fur or the feathers or even the scales of your animal, because that is going to still play out in the finished piece. Now I'm going to be using my blending stump, and you guys should have different sizes of blending stumps. I bought out a couple different shops, so some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller, but they all more or less work the same. It is just a roll of paper, and if at some point for some reason you need to quote-unquote sharpen it, you can get a piece of sandpaper and do the motion that I'm demonstrating right there. Just rub the edge against a little bit of sandpaper, and that sharpens it right back up. But now it's brand new and nice and bright and perfect to get started. I'm going to start moving in these little circles in order to blend the charcoal that I've already added down. Circular motions help because they are a little more random looking, a little bit softer, a little bit more natural. So especially for these first layers, I tend to go very circular. As I go later on, I may get a little bit more linear if I'm trying to create a strong line somewhere, but circles are where it's at least at the very beginning. So I'm making tight little circles, tiny little circles, and you can see I'm also exploring if I can use this charcoal to disappear my pencil lines, and I'm pretty pleased with how much they're vanishing. Since I went a lot darker with you guys, I definitely didn't want to erase it because that was going to really mess up my paper. Turns out, don't have to. Oftentimes we erase a lot when we're learning, but we really don't have to. I like to leave those lines in as a reminder of the process, really. And it adds, I think, a little interesting complexity and a little nod to who the artist was and how they were involved. So I'm just blending my charcoal, erasing, quote unquote, or vanishing some of my pencil lines and getting a nice base layer down with my charcoal. So now that I've softened my edges, got a nice blended base layer, I'm actually going to do my first step of erasing. After I just got done talking about how I don't erase very much, I do erase when I want to create brighter sections. So especially with charcoal, it's all about dark layers, bright layers, and you can see around the eye, it's a little bit brighter than what I have there. And I also made that depth in the ear way too large, so I need to narrow that down. So I'm going to use a really key tool that we use in charcoal drawing, and it's called a kneaded eraser. And you can see I unwrapped it and I'm just pulling it apart. And as I use it more and it gets warmer and it gets more worn out, it'll actually stretch apart almost like taffy. It's a very weird texture. It's cool because it can help you clean yourself up. So if you get charcoal on your hands, you just tap it against your skin and it will pull the charcoal up. And then we'll do the same thing on the paper. Now you can roll it into a point and rub with it the same way you would a linoleum or a rubber eraser. But since it's kneaded, you can also use it like a sticky effect, and I can push down against the paper and pull up and just lift that way. So I'm lifting a little bit of charcoal. This is really effective because I've already talked about how erasing can alter the texture of the paper. In this case, since I'm just dabbing essentially with this eraser and just lifting sections to create lighter spots, it doesn't actually damage the texture of the paper really at all. So you can lightly rub with it, or you can do this lifting effect and you can get nice highlights and generated pretty easily. But now you can see, just to test it, I went over the pencil, and I'm not really able to pull up the pencil as well. These erasers work particularly well with softer materials like charcoal, and not so well with harder materials like a pencil or graphite. So we're going to use it on the charcoal, but just so you know, if you're trying to erase pencil lines, I'd still use the pencil eraser. Now that I've created some more highlights, I'm going to create some more shadows. So if we look around the eye, for instance, there's some very dark sections. They're not very dark, but they're darker sections, which makes sense. I like to think about the anatomy when I'm drawing animals, and if I think about the skull, there are peaks of bone, like the orbital around the eye. And as the skin lays down over the top of it, it's going to create a curve, which creates a darker section. So I'm adding in some darker chunks of the charcoal. I'm pushing down a little bit harder in order to create more shadow where I see the shadow, and where I logically kind of makes sense for that shadow to be. Drawing is interesting because it's both the art of seeing. If you want to be photorealistic, you have to really look and be very hyper accurate to what you're seeing. There's also an element of what do you know? And you as an artist get to choose how much of it are you drawing from what's in your head and how much are you drawing from the image in front of you. As you're practicing, I'd recommend spending a little bit more time focusing on trying to draw the actual image in front of you. That learning to see and then translate that into actual drawing is a really important skill. But always remember that you are the artist. You get to add your interpretation. You get to add your flair. So as I was just talking about how I like to think about the anatomy when I'm drawing these animals, if that's something that helps you, keep that in mind as you go. You may end up with some kind of odd or exaggerated proportions at times, but it may be more fun for you to be using that sort of mental capacity that you have. So you get to choose how much of what you see and how much of what you know plays out in your drawing. You are the artist. It's your choice. No, I think I'm just about done here. I like the way the fur looks like it's a little bit folded with those dark lines. I like where my highlights ended up. I've realized this photo is kind of funny because I can only see one ear of the rabbit, but that's what the photo says, so I'm just going to work with that today. Now I'm going to add in a layer for the background. So I've taken my charcoal, I've turned it onto its side, and I can get a slightly different texture by using it this way. I just like adding a background because I think it adds a nice finish to the drawing. You don't have to, it's in no way a requirement. And if I were using the Hahnemühle Ingres paper, which is that tinted paper that you have, I could use the white charcoal instead of the black if I wanted to, since it would be tinted and it would still show up there. If I had any colored pastels or colored pencils even, I could add that in for the background. You don't have to necessarily use the charcoal. I just like the charcoal here because it adds a really dark layer for the rabbit to kind of contrast against. The rabbit themselves is pretty dark, but still, if I make that background even darker, the rabbit, I think, stands out really nicely against it. You don't have to do this. It is just a matter of preference, but I just wanted to show you in case it was something that you wanted to try. Now we're going to give this white charcoal a try. And remember, white charcoal is not actually charcoal. It's probably closer to a Conte crayon or a hard pastel. Now I'm showing actually the difference in pressure and what that creates. You have to press really hard to get a lot of white out of this. For that strong white layer there, I pushed really hard, and you can see me scratching at it and really nothing came off. So you might be surprised by how little white you actually get on your drawing when you use this utensil. It's not meant to compensate for like the light of the paper or the light of a even softer medium. It just gives you a nice soft lightening effect. So you can bring it in for very light highlights, just a very gentle touch. And it almost has a blending effect as well. As it starts to pull through the charcoal, you can sometimes see it smearing and moving with the white charcoal. I don't tend to use a ton of white charcoal. I use it just to brighten up my brightest highlights and actually to add like a little bit of line work almost, because the charcoal is so smooth and soft versus this, which is quite a hard material. The smooth, soft effect of the charcoal gives you very fuzzy edges, whereas the harder effect of the white charcoal can give you some nice line work, which just adds a little bit more texture and detail to your animal. Now, last but not least, I'm just going to add a few finishing touches, a few little dark lines that I'll blend out, just to make sure that I have really strong blacks and then really bright whites. And any drawing, that strong contrast makes a big difference in just the efficacy of the image and how it pops off the page. So dark darks, black blacks, and then light lights. And I always got to sign it. Always sign your work. Be proud of what you did. I'm so excited that you gave this a chance today, and I hope you're happy with what you did. And I really hope that you keep drawing. So thanks for spending some time with me, and hope to see you again soon.